Story 1. A weekend at a Wisconsin resort. It was spring of 1994. My wife and I spent what we thought would be a romantic weekend at a Wisconsin resort. All was as we had planned until the second night, Saturday, that we stayed there. At approximately 3 a.m., we were awakened by the sound of what we thought were shouts coming from the breezeway outside of our room. It was a moonless night, yet there was a flickering light that seemed to reflect under the outer door. I looked out the window to see what the commotion was, saw nothing to account for the light that now reflected off the walls. As I turned to look back at my wife, I saw that she was sitting bolt upright in bed, with what appeared to be paint splashed across her face. Assuming that it was a play of light, I looked harder to reassure my eyes. Her face took on the hard features of an angry male figure. She glared at me with piercing eyes. Needless to say, I panicked, and I threw on the light switch, thinking that maybe it was a dream. It wasn't. As soon as it had started, it was over. My wife returned to her lovely self, and we spent the next hour telling each other that what we thought had happened didn't happen. We later learned that the area the resort was built on had been a sacred American Indian healing spot. My wife now has occasional nightmares that wake her up in cold sweats, with no recollection of what the bad dreams were about. But we believe it was tied to that night in that Wisconsin resort. Story 2. Trip to Wisconsin. We were on a trip to Wisconsin, and we had the most terrifying experience of our lives. We were 23 and 24. And we were both set to hunt my uncle's property. We usually stayed 2 or 3 nights. We were completely surrounded by woods. We had a generator out back, so we had electricity. It was late at night when we finally got back from the bar on the second night. For some reason, we saw a bright light in the trailer. We couldn't hear the generator running, so we knew it was off. We thought we might have just be imagining it. We were quite drunk at this point. We ventured closer to the trailer, and we saw something moving. We grabbed the .22 rifle we had left out. Mark ran in with the gun, while I went to get our cell phone to call the police. Just as he entered the door, the light went out. I ran in with a flashlight, but there was nothing there. We went and started the generator. Got all the lights on in the place. We still saw nothing. The weirdest part was, all of our doors and windows were locked tight. Mark had to unlock the front door to get in, and nothing could have got past him to get back out. Somehow, the intruder managed to get out through locked windows and doors, without unlocking them, without breaking anything. We were at the tavern the next day, and described our story to the locals. They asked us where the place was we were hunting, and that's when an old man came up and told us about a hunter who had died there. He was in a tree stand. When he stood up to shoot a deer, he slipped, fell out of the tree stand, and died of internal injuries before help could arrive. They say he comes back every deer season to get that deer that he missed. I don't know if that's a true story, but it would explain a lot. Story 3. Our Wisconsin home. We rented a home up in Milwaukee. Well, a suburb. Not exactly the kind of place one might imagine a ghost to dwell. But for my family, it was nothing less. Only on the day that we were moving out did we find out from a man who knew the original owners that the owner's 16-year-old son had died in a car accident a long time ago. Strangely enough, his room was the same room my older brother had stayed in. Both of their names were James. My first experience with ghostly James was the usual footsteps in the hall. Nothing much, but I knew he was there. My dog hated to go in our basement, so I knew she knew as well that something wasn't right. Sometimes I would be sick and stay home from school. My parents had things to do, so they would leave me alone for short amounts of time. I never let my dog away from my side. The strangest incident, though, were completely unexplainable. During the week, my aunt and grandmother were visiting from down south. My sister and I both had to sleep in my brother's bed because ours was taken. One night I couldn't sleep. I don't know why. I was just staring at the ceiling, as if I knew I was waiting for something to happen. And then it did. Suddenly there was music. It was music of the night from Phantom of the Opera. Not something you wanted to hear in the middle of the night. It got louder and louder and louder. And I grew angrier and angrier. I thought it was my relatives listening to one of Dad's favorite CDs. So I got up, getting ready to tell them that they needed to turn it down. When I was halfway out of my room, I saw my dad race into the hallway. I followed him and peered down the dark hallway into the family room, just as Dad was entering the family room and turning off the CD player. No one else was down there. The next morning, I was blamed for the music. I, for one, though, would never go down there at 1 a.m, in the dark, alone, to turn on my most hated CD. The next occurrence, it was nearing Christmas. My mom was going into the basement to get ornaments out of storage. It didn't take long before there was a scream of terror, causing me to jump from my seat and race to my mother's aid downstairs. Mom hated that windowless room in the first place, and she always begged the ghost not to turn the lights off on her. When she reached the very back of the room, though, the lights clicked off. Our house dated back to the early 1950s, so not everything about it was perfect. One day, our kitchen light switch was stuck. Mom suspected that something was wrong, so she called an electrician. When he got there, he stood on our table to check the light above it. As soon as he touched our ceiling, he yelped. The wires must be messed up terribly. He said it was so hot you could fry an egg on our kitchen ceiling. He was surprised that our house hadn't burned down. Once everything was fixed, the light switch worked fine. But no one could figure out why the light switch itself had stuck like that. Even the electrician was puzzled as to why the switch had stuck. The day we left the house for good was somewhat sad. The house seemed dreary and just sad. His parents are living in the house again, so maybe he's happier now. Story 4. A haunting in Wisconsin. We lived in Wisconsin before we moved down here to Arkansas. I'm married, and at that time I had 3 kids. In every picture of my youngest child, the baby of the family, had a stream of light down on him. My husband had those weird hours of a firefighter, and I always slept with 1 or 2 lights on. I kept the baby's bassinet beside of me. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up with this overpowering feeling of being watched. Once, when we were having dinner, my husband, of course, was at work, the basement door slammed shut. The basement windows were all shut. The house was shut up tighter than a drum. We don't know how anything could have slammed the door shut. One of my daughters had the experience at night of seeing a short, heavy-set woman coming towards her. Thinking it was me playing a joke on her, she called out my name, and when I didn't answer, she pulled the blanket over her head and went screaming up the stairs to my room. I stayed asleep. My husband was home, and he heard her. He comforted her, telling her it was just a nightmare. She ended up sleeping in the bathtub that night. She was too afraid to go to her room. She felt safe there. I didn't find out about this until a week later, at which time I moved downstairs at the end of the hall so that I could keep a close eye on the children. My husband and I went out for a couple hours, leaving our babysitter in charge. When I got home, the kids were yelling and screaming, jumping up and down on the furniture. The babysitter said they'd heard a lot of rats scratching at the chimney wall, but they never saw any. The babysitter never came back, and experiences continued until eventually we moved out of the house and out of the state. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, hit the subscribe button and give me a thumbs up. I personally love these stories because I love the state of Wisconsin. I visited there a few times over the past couple of years. Beautiful state. Very flat in the area I've been to, but very cool nonetheless. Thanks for listening. Bye.